Today we're going to look at what some refer to as a story's dramatic arc. Stories have a beginning, middle, and end. Most of us can agree on that. But sometimes that ending is another beginning, and that's okay too. Throughout the story, things happen, action of some sort happens, and then we have an ending. This happening is referred to as plot. Plot is the basic action of your novel. It tells the reader your character's goals, who their opponents are, what their obstacles are, and the conflict that leads us to a particular conclusion. So in that sense, plot has a structure. To take a look at the structure, we're going to use a basic outline that was created by Gustav Freytag. It's called Gustav Freytag's Pyramid, and it looks like this. In its barest outline, we see, first, exposition. This is where the story starts. This is that beginning. Okay. Then there's some sort of rising action that builds to a turning point or a climax at the point or at the top. Then we have the falling action, where the main character gets beat up a little bit or faces some sort of hostility or uncertainty. And then we reach the resolution, the release of the tension and the anxiety, or the end, the place where we're going to end our story. Okay. When we're talking about the novel, we're going to take this kind of basic structure that we have and we're going to add some additional pieces in. Notice the main pieces are still here. When we look at the structure in this sense for the novel, we see his pieces that he had to begin with. In addition, I've added some items that you need to be able to identify in your own work. Now, if you can't identify them in your own work, then the person who is reading your novel is not going to be able to identify them, or it's not going to feel right to them. The way the story comes together isn't going to feel right for them. So make sure that you can pick out these pieces yourself. Down at the bottom, at the beginning, we have the stasis. That's just another word for exposition or beginning. That's the point where your character is positioned when we open to page 1. So when you think about your favorite novel, you think about reading what's happening on that first page. And on those first couple pages, we get a sense of the setting, we get a sense of where we are in time, and that's a stasis. That's where everything starts to happen. And then fairly soon after that stasis or that opening, 5 or 10 pages in perhaps, we find an inciting incident. The inciting incident is the incident or the moment when the protagonist's life is changed forever. It's the moment that sets everything else in motion. It sets the person off onto a quest of some kind. When you think about something as simple as a children's fairy tale, say Jack and the Beanstalk, the inciting incident is the moment when Jack finds those beans. That's what sets him off on this quest to find out what's going to happen with them. It's that one moment, that thing that happens that basically changes that person's life forever, even though in that particular second they don't know that that's what's happening. Okay? Then along the way, we start to see the complications of that. So the complications of finding those magic beans and growing that beanstalk. And when you go up there, are some of the complications in that leading up to that moment when Jack meets the giant, or that climax that we see up at the top of the pyramid. We're going to see conflict. We're going to see obstacles. We're going to see things get in the way of getting to that climactic moment. Right? Then we're going to reach that climax, or that particular moment, that peak in the curve, the highest point of tension. Right? And when we hit that, a choice is made. So you have to decide, hey, here's the giant in front of us. Now what are we going to do? What is the decision that we're going to make? What are some of the things that are going to happen? When we make that critical decision of what's going to happen next. What is that moment in your work? Look for that moment in your work when the protagonist decides what is going to happen next after that highest point of tension. Then we're going to see these choices and consequences play out. The protagonist should be, during this time, right, getting wiser, or at minimum, the protagonist should be becoming enlightened in some way. It depends on what kind of story you're telling, what you're going to see happening in that falling action, or the things that happen after that main decision is made. And then you're going to have some sort of resolution. This is where your character is going to be changed somehow. They have to be changed in some significant way. Something significant has to happen. All of these points along this arc have to be significant in some way. If they're not, then your reader's going to say, so what? And if there is not a so what at each of these points in your novel, then you're going to lose your reader, and you're not going to be able to make your story believable to them all the way from that beginning, that stasis, to the end, the resolution, or the new stasis. Okay. Hey, for us, when you're writing a story, when you're writing a novel, you can't just have this one protagonist, this one person that kind of trots along through the quest. You can. There are books that are written with just that one person in that one arc. But for the most part, and in most stories that we see, or most novels, we also have to have a subplot, something that's happening at the same time as the main story. And you might have one subplot, and you may have multiple subplots. Those subplots are the storylines that support the plot. They're things that highlight the obstacles that we run into. They provide additional twists, or they expose characters' characteristics, or the characteristics of some other characters that are in the play. They generally help to keep your reader engaged in the story and moving through your story. And they interact with that main plot all the way through. Something that is super important to keep in mind when you're thinking about this is that they too have a beginning, middle, and end. They have an arc as well. They have the stasis, they have the rising action, a climax, and the resolution, the falling action and resolution. Don't ever leave those pieces hanging unless you're leaving them hanging for a particular reason. If there's a reason that it's hanging and your reader knows that when they go through, then that's okay. But you have to know that that's the main thing that I try to tell my students when we talk about this, is that you have to know every step of the way what's going on with your story, why it's happening, why you're putting that there. And you may not know, you may not know when you're going through it, but when you're in your revision process and you come across something and you're like, I know this is necessary, and I know this needs to be here, but the pieces just aren't quite coming together. I've left some loose ends here. You have to know enough about that arc and about the story's plot to be able to figure out how those pieces go together and to make that happen for your reader. This storytelling is a complicated web to weave, and if you don't know those pieces in your plot, if you can't at least sketch them out to begin with and know what's going to happen and why, things change when you're writing. Like I said, it's a complicated web, but at least pause, create a new sketch, think about it. When you're revising, make sure that those connections are being made. Make sure that you have all of the pieces that you need to have to make this a coherent story for your reader. And if you do that, then your readers are going to follow you anywhere that you want to lead them. And with that, I'm going to wish you much luck on your current project, and thank you for allowing me into your world for a few minutes. I hope this has been somewhat helpful.